What if everything we've been told about autoimmunity is wrong? I'm Elizabeth Yarnell. After awakening partially blind one morning in 1999, a doctor told me my multiple sclerosis would put me in a wheelchair within 10 years. I refused to accept that as the end of the story, so I started investigating. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, the podcast that uncovers the inflammation lurking underneath your ailments. Because autoimmune and chronic conditions should not be viewed as death knells when they are actually alarm bells. I'm a traditional naturopath and founder of the Inflammation Academy. And in 2 episodes every week, we dig into what conventional medicine might be missing. If you're living with chronic or unexplained symptoms, this investigation is for you. Your body has been trying to tell you something. Let's start listening. Hi, and welcome to today's Inflammation Investigator. Today, we're going to talk about mold and mold toxicity and how that relates to inflammation. My special guest today is Dr. Tricia Thompson, DO. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Thompson. She's a board certified physician and the founder and CEO of Root Cause Doc, an online functional and integrative medicine practice based in Maryland that serves clients nationwide. With over 20 years of medical experience, Dr. Thompson initially built her career in emergency medicine, where she worked on the front lines treating acute health issues. Over time, she became increasingly aware of the limitations of conventional medicine when it came to addressing chronic, unresolved conditions that didn't improve despite traditional treatments. Driven by a desire to find deeper solutions for her patients, Dr. Thompson transitioned into functional and integrative medicine. This shift allowed her to focus on root cause approaches, where she could dig deeper into the complexities of chronic illnesses using advanced lab testing, personalized interventions, and holistic strategies to address everything from fatigue and brain fog to autoimmune disorders. Today, Dr. Thompson's practice emphasizes empowering patients to take control of their health through lifestyle changes, detoxification, and nutritional optimization, leading to lasting transformation. Welcome to the Inflammation Investigator, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to talk with you today about mold and mold toxicity. As I was telling you before we started recording, this really isn't something we've talked that much about on the Inflammation Investigator yet. And I know that it is often an underlying issue for a lot of people's chronic health problems. So maybe we should start by learning or hearing how you got into this. How did you decide to transition from emergency medicine into chronic healthcare?
Yeah, that was it was kind of a long road. I had been thinking about it for a long time. I'm an osteopath by training by choice. I really liked a more holistic approach. And going through medical school and then choosing a residency, I loved emergency medicine. Like it fired me up. I liked the intensity and the acuteness of it. What I found though is after about 10 years in practice, so somewhere in the mid 2010s, something shifted. And the people that we were seeing, yeah, we still had emergencies and traumas, and I worked at a big center that saw 90,000 patients a year. So, um, more and more people were coming in with all this chronic stuff or a complication of a chronic illness. So they were coming in with inflammatory bowel disease that they were on all these medications and they were still having symptoms and then needed surgery. A lot of other autoimmune stuff like lupus or MS or other things like that. I'm like, why is nobody getting to the bottom of this? And then all of those worried well, and we used to honestly in the ER roll our eyes at them. Oh, well, the I know my bodies is what we used to call them. But just because we couldn't find something wrong in their lab tests and they had been to all the specialists and they were like, a lot of people got dismissed as being a bit crazy because nobody could understand what they were going through. So I just, it was not as much fun because in the ER, I didn't have the time or the energy to fix them. And I didn't even have anybody to send them to. There wasn't even a bucket of people, certainly not where I was practicing on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, that I could say, yeah, go to this person, they'll figure it out. So I did a 2-year fellowship with Andrew Weil at the University of Arizona in integrative medicine and then started IFM and A4M, and it's just been one thing after the other, learning and building. And I really got into the mold stuff because I went to a mitochondria class. And I did it was like 3 days intensive, and I was like, whoa, mold has such a huge impact on mitochondria. And most of us who would watch this podcast would know mitochondria have a lot to do with how our energy is produced. They also have a lot to do with how our immune system talks to the rest of the body and to our hormones. And when the mitochondria don't work properly, people don't recover. They have those like fits and starts. They do okay for a while and then they fall back down. So the mold and toxicity piece is something that I don't think a lot of people know a ton about. So I've spent the last many years diving into that further, and it's a big part of what I do with my clients at this point.
So, for people who are listening who might not be that familiar with mitochondria, can you explain what are mitochondria? What is their job? Where do they live? All of that.
Yeah, so the mitochondria live in the cells, so they're intracellular organelles. They actually used to be a specific type of bacteria that moved into our cells and then became part of how our system works. And they create energy through that horrible thing that you might have had to memorize in high school called the Krebs cycle, where we make the inputs have to come in and then a little energy, ATPs, pop out. And the problem with mitochondrial dysfunction is that there's a huge cell membrane, not just on the outside of the mitochondria, but inside the mitochondria. And when that membrane isn't healthy and stabilized, the entire cycle stops, which is why we see a lot of people with chronic disease or inflammation. They're good until they overdo it, right? So they have a weekend, they're like, I'm going to clean the yard. They go clean the yard on Saturday, and Sunday they literally don't get off the couch because they don't have the stamina or the recovery ability because they don't have the energy in those mitochondria, and they're in every cell of our bodies except red blood cells. So they're really everywhere.
So, how are mitochondria connected to mold toxicity?
So it is one of the primary places that gets injured, I would say first. So mold toxicity really is a inflammatory process that can show up anywhere in the body, but it depends on the type of mold. So if you do a mold test on yourself, or you just go open a book and say, how many types of mold? There are thousands of types of molds, and some of them produce something called a mycotoxin. So those mycotoxins are tiny, tiny particles that we can inhale or ingest. And then certain people, about 20% of people, it's estimated in the United States, don't have the ability to detox them as well as others. So this is why you'll often hear people with a mold toxicity, mold exposure say, my husband lives here and he's fine and I can't get off, I can't do anything. It's because they have different detox pathways. So that's one of the reasons why mold toxicity is kind of sneaky, because it builds up slowly. So, and the other thing I want people to know is this could have been an exposure from 20 years ago. If you're one of the lucky ones that doesn't detox properly, it could have been grandma's basement that you lived in for a summer after college. And it's not something that has to be going on in your house right now, which a lot of people are like, nah, that was a long time ago. That can't be it. And because our bodies naturally are detoxing all the time, but if you're missing a certain genes, and we can actually test for those, we can know if you're more likely to be susceptible, kind of the canary in the coal mine, than other people.
We were talking before we started about how my recollections of living on the East Coast include a ton of mold kind of everywhere all the time. But here I live in Colorado, which is a really dry climate. Yet you were saying that you can also find a lot of mold in dry climates. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so just because it's dry doesn't mean that mold can't exist there. Now, if it's totally dry in any space and there was, let's say, mold from old mold, but it doesn't have any moisture, it's not going to grow. So that's the good news. So in a drier climate, it won't grow. But if it's already there, and some people have a lot of evidence that it's like in the sheetrock when they build your house. So it's not that the mold came after there was a leak in the shower or the roof. It's that it was already in the sheetrock or already in the building materials, and then it got wet, and then it had a nice, happy spot to grow. And then the mold itself is very rarely the problem. It's those mycotoxins that the mold produces when it's active.
So the wetness kind of activates the mold.
Exactly. So it's hibernating until it needs moisture to be growing actively.
Ah, so how can you figure out if your illness is related to mold?
So there's a few ways you can do it, and a couple of them are really simple and kind of cheap online. So there's actually a test called a visual contrast study, VCS test, and I'll get you the exact website where people can go and take this test on your own. And ask a bunch of history questions, but then you actually test your retina. So you're testing your eyeballs one eye at a time, and you're just saying, are the lines that you're seeing on the screen going up and down, left and right, or right and left? Each time they
Oh,
show you a new image, it gets skinnier and skinnier. So it's not testing your visual acuity, your ability to see. It's testing your ability to see contrast. So the difference between white and black or white and gray. And it gets very, very subtle by the end. So it was discovered, actually, this was originally used by the military. So they used it for fighter pilots, because if you can imagine, if you can't see something way off in the distance as a contrast, then you're going to be in danger. And if you've been sick or had a head injury or got exposed to something, they found that these pilots, their visual contrast would go down, and which wasn't safe. We also have associated this with mold toxicity. So if you take one of these tests and you fail, it is because those mycotoxins are actually affecting the retina and your ability to see that contrast. And what's cool is as we start working people and cleaning things up, they can take that test every week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks and watch it get better. Watch less red, more green checks. It's pretty cool.
oh my gosh. When you first started talking about this, it made me think of that internet meme with the gold dress or the blue dress. Do you remember that
Yes.
one?
I do. And it would be curious to know if that is part of the reason why, women, we're not that prone to color blindness like some guys are. But, everybody had a very different experience there. So I'd be curious if that might be part of the reason why.
It never occurred to me that mold exposure would change your vision, that it would
Absolutely.
actually affect that, how you
Yeah.
see.
And people notice it mostly at night. So they're like, can't get down the stairs at night because it's, they don't know where the step is, where they used to be able to see it just enough in the dark that they could get down. Or if they're driving. So a lot of people blame that on age, oh, I'm 50 now. Well, if you're 50 now, you might need to pull out the reading glasses, but it shouldn't really affect your ability to see the street sign or the dog crossing in front of you in the evening. That is a contrast issue. And it is, I've had so many clients be like, oh my gosh, I can drive at night again. I'm not afraid to walk down the stairs without turning on the light because they can see enough that where they couldn't see that before.
Okay, well, I want to come back to that. How do you clear that out? But let's start first with the kind of a fundamental question is why is mold related illness so often missed?
Um, well, in the conventional medical system, we don't really think it's a problem. We think, everybody's exposed to molds and, the trees when the leaves fall in the autumn, that's mold, and there's mold in our food, in our flowers, in our grains. And, you know, it was very hard to prove that mold was a problem unless it was actually an infection inside of you, which is pretty rare, not impossible. And we actually see it a lot, especially in the sinuses. We test some things with that, and I can go through kind of how we look at things and how we address them because it's a very step by step kind of process. If you start with at the end, you actually make people a lot sicker, and then they don't like you very much. So you have to kind of work through it. So doctors, traditional, conventional doctors, only thought mold was an issue if you actually were growing, you know, a fungal ball in your lung or in your sinus cavity or in your brain, which does happen. But they didn't really see it as a toxin exposure issue. Um, and it causes a lot of symptoms. And I can go into, you know, some of them that, you know, are inflammatory symptoms that are very much associated or need to be looked into. And there are a lot of other things that can do it too. So I don't know, have you heard of chronic inflammatory response syndrome?
I'm not
CIRS?
sure. Can
Okay,
you describe
so
it?
I can. So it is, I believe, the precursor to all autoimmune disease, and it's an inflammatory process. It can be triggered by many things. So mold toxins is just one of them. Other things we think about that cause chronic inflammatory response syndrome or and things that look like chronic fatigue type syndromes are, you know, Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses, vaccinations, medications. COVID was a chronic inflammatory response syndrome inducing illness in a lot of people, especially those kind of long COVID people. And what's interesting is when you check those long COVID people, they have the same genetic HLA haplotypes as my people who don't do well with other exposures. So it is a detox process, and then it starts to affect kind of the whole body. And there's actually a diagram. I can send it to you, or I can even pull it up that if you have these things, if you have these symptoms, then that's something that probably needs to be investigated as a biotoxin illness. And then through the history, we can most of the time figure out which key unlocked that door. And it might be multiple things, might be a combination of all of these things. So we don't just go, oh, you've got mold. We kind of address it all at the same time.
So, if I was someone who was experiencing chronic symptoms, what would be some of the symptoms that might tip me off that maybe this was coming from mold?
Hmm. Number one, probably fatigue. And what I mean by fatigue is just that recovery, that resilience that you don't have like you used to. You remember you used to go for a 5 mile run and you were like, woohoo, let's go. But with these fatigue illnesses, you're like, every footfall stinks. And then the next day there's no way you could run again. So that's one thing. Difficulty concentrating. So that can be either focus, like squirrel, 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 ADHD type stuff, or it can be that you just don't remember. You read the same email 6 times and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. Like you just can't stay focused long enough. Um, Word finding issues. So a lot of clients come to me and they're like, am I getting demented? Like I know the word for pencil, but I couldn't come up with it. Other things, shortness of breath and chronic sinus stuff. That's very often a biotoxin illness system cluster. And a lot of people just chalk it up to, oh, I have allergies. You know what? If you didn't always have allergies, then we have to look into this because that is very often. And what we find is that when we treat the process in the sinuses, people's allergies go away. And they're like, I didn't need my Zyrtec. I didn't need my Allegra the next season when it rolls around. And a lot of abdominal stuff, kind of abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, because it very much affects all of the nervous system. And a lot of this stuff is nervous system driven.
Mm,
So
that
it
makes
kind
a
of can
lot of
be
sense.
everything, which is what makes it, kind of a big bucket. But, and everybody that has any of those things doesn't necessarily have biotoxin illness, but you only need three of these little categories to actually qualify into that label. So,
So if you do think or suspect that maybe mold is part of the problem, part of
mhm.
your problems, and you take that vision test, tell me again what that's called.
It's called a visual contrast study, VCS.
A
And
visual
I think it's the
contrast study.
Got Mold website, but I'll get you the link of where people can take it. There's two out there. One of them's much more accurate than the other. So I don't want people, it's only $10. Then I don't want you paying for the wrong test.
Okay, great. We will put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So then what? Then what do you do if you fail that test, what do you do next?
Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure you're not still in a mold-laden environment. So that might be just doing a really good visual inspection of inside your house. Um, and the way I do it, I don't have people go out and like tear down their walls and hire somebody for $1,000 to come do an inspection. We see if we can get you better. And we do that with kind of a multi-pronged approach, an anti-inflammatory food plan, some neuroinflammation supplement support. So things like phosphatidylcholine, omegas, Relora, L-theanine, holy basil combination. And usually, if people have mold or other biotoxins, that is like they'll notice immediately that within a couple of days, their focus is better. They're not as tired. Their gut's more calm. So, so the food, we work on the nervous system a lot, making sure that you're getting adequate sleep, bringing down your parasympathetic and using 4-7-8 breath or other meditation type practices. And then we'll add binders and we'll make sure that the gut microbiome is really healthy. And we don't do that with probiotics because most people don't need probiotics. They actually need some antimicrobial herbs to get rid of the bad guys that are in the gut. And that we can, we usually treat based on the history, and most people get much better very quickly. If you get stuck, we can always do fancy tests that are more expensive, looking at urine mycotoxin levels, which I think is fascinating to have kind of the before and after, or a gut microbiome test where we're looking at a stool test, that sort of thing. All of, there's nothing I say, there's no test I can't get my hands on, but I don't do a lot of testing up front because I've been doing this long enough. I know what we're going to find. But if you want to find out, we can order anything.
So that's all you need to do is kind of clear out the source of the mold and then help your body clear out any mold that's in there as well, help your pathways function.
Yeah, definitely helping the pathways function, making sure the liver is working really well and the gut is working really well, because without that, we're not going to detox this stuff. But that's really just kind of the first phase. So once we get the stuff out of you, we still have to repair things like the mitochondria and the cell membranes. We have to make sure that they're working the way they're supposed to, which is not as simple a process as just doing a detox or taking some binders, although they can be helpful for getting stuff out. Everything's got to be kind of laid out in a pathway so that you're doing it the right way. Because if I just throw binders at you, or you probably know people that have done, they've done a liver cleanse and they feel so much worse because their body wasn't ready to do that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's kind of the pathway, but then we really have to heal the brain. So there's damage to those mitochondria in the brain. And as we know, nerves take long time to heal. But the cool part is once they start to heal, we start to see things like tinnitus go away, peripheral neuropathy go away, the brain fog, concentration, memory stuff improves. But that part takes a lot longer. It can take, from 3 months to 3 years or longer for that to happen, depending on how much damage was done in the first place.
Since your background is in emergency room medicine, how does
Mhm.
that influence how you practice now?
I think the biggest influence that has is well, one, I know sick, not sick. So, some doctors aren't that good at telling who's sick and who's not sick. But I think the biggest thing is the investigatory phase. So in emergency medicine, you're given a snapshot of somebody's life. You get
Mhm.
some of the story, and then you've got to make decisions based on that. So one of my superpowers is that diagnostic, connecting the dots. And if I, like, yeah, I have one here. Like if I talk to a client, this is what their notes look like. This is a
Wow.
timeline of from birth till now or before birth till now, family history, things that happened, places they were. So for me, it's all about connecting those pathways and what what got screwed up first, and then oh, well, then this got added onto it. Oh, and then I got divorced, and oh, then I had. I went to Japan or I went to Africa for a month and I got malaria or whatever. So you can start to see all the pieces come together. So for me, it's that diagnostic complexity that I think are very similar, even though we're looking at different pathology.
So we talked a little bit about why some people might react more to mold than people who might be living in the same house as they are. So would you say it comes down to those clearance pathways?
I think that's a big piece of it. Not for everybody. I mean, certainly the load, and then, you know, did I have Lyme disease when I was 18 that I never quite got rid of, or did I have something else that has been added on? Was I on a medication? Was I on a lot of antibiotics as a kid? Did I screw up my gut microbiome? Um, but yeah, those detox pathways are huge, and we can actually measure HLA haplotypes. And we can put you, based on those findings, into multiple different buckets of, difficulty clearing mold toxins, difficulty clearing Lyme disease, um, difficulty clearing everything. We call them like the chronic. I mean, they're just like almost destined to have chronic illness. And if we know, and we can, and this is blood work or, DNA testing, if we know that, then we just know it's going to take longer for you and that it's not impossible, but you're also going to be very susceptible. So when I have people that I know or like that, or I sort of suspect have those issues, like they take a binder with them on vacation. Like if you end up in a musty hotel room, just start taking, like if it can't get into your storage places, it can't get into your brain and your fat and your liver and all the places that we store this stuff, then you're not going to get sick from it, at least not in the way you were before.
What kinds of binders do you recommend?
So I tend to use cell core binders, but things with carbon activation, chlorella, um, I like their stuff because you can step people up into like milder and then stronger and then strongest. Because if you start with the strongest, again, people aren't going to like me. They're going to have bad reactions to that. Um, so and healthy food. I think healthy food is one of the best things that we can do if we can stop throwing inflammation from, oils and sugars and preservatives and pesticides into our body, then we're emptying the bucket some so that you can handle it better.
So what kinds of struggles do you have between your past as an ER room physician and your present as a more holistic doctor?
That's a really good question. Um, Being patient with people. I think I'll own that, part of the emergency room experience is that we get it done now, we get the test now, we find out, like, and it can happen very quickly. This process does take a lot more time. And me and my team, I have two health coaches and two nutrition coaches and two nurses that are really supportive of people all the way through, because we want the magic wand. And then I tell people, if I could wave my magic wand and make you better, I would, but it's a process. So for me, I have to have patience, and I know it's going to take longer, but being able to share that patience with clients so that they don't get frustrated and they're like, this isn't working. And I'm like, it is working. It's just not working on your timeline. So we do a lot of mindset work around that.
So if I know that I've seen some like black mold on the grout in my shower, let's say, what would I do about that? How do you get rid of that?
So most of the stuff that's on the grout in the shower is actually mildew. So most of that is mildew, not mold. Mildew does not produce the type of biotoxins that mold does. So household cleaners, combinations of, even vinegar and baking soda will take that off. Bleach will take that off, even though we don't really want to be breathing that in while we're cleaning it. The molds tend to not be on the surface because the surface dries and then they would
Um,
stop growing until the next time. So they tend to hide. They like it dark and warm and moist. So they're more likely to be behind the wall where your shower head is, where there was a little leak that went back there. So we don't always see them. However, if you're looking to buy a new property or you're, house shopping, take a friend like me who can smell mold from a mile away. Like I walk into a room, I can smell it in towels, I can smell it in sheets. I have that ability, and I think a lot of more sensitive people can tell that. You can have an inspection done to know. There's testing out there called Hermie testing that is maybe too sensitive. And you can go online and you order these towels essentially, and you go and you dust everything and then you send it back. The problem with that is it's going to show you whatever's there. So it doesn't mean that it's actually active. It might be something that's old. So it doesn't tell you what's biologically going on currently in the environment. And I don't pretend to be an expert in clearing this stuff out. I really refer people to experts to do that. And remember, though, if you're going to get your house tested, the tester and the remediator are two different people. There's a conflict of interest there where a lot of people have gotten into big, expensive projects that maybe weren't necessary. But if you're not improving, so let's say you're doing all the right stuff, you're getting good sleep, you're relaxing, you're getting your nervous system in line, you're taking the right supplements, you're taking the right binders, and you do that VCS test in another month and then another month, and it's the same. That tells me that you're in a moldy environment somewhere. And sometimes it's at work, sometimes it's not at home. I've seen people have mold in their cars. I've seen people have mold in their Keurigs, their little coffee makers, because you can't open them up, can't get in the inside. They never dry out. So
mm.
there's a lot of places that it can be hiding, but I don't also want people to be terrified of mold. I've gotten on some of these mold groups, Facebook and whatever, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, there's this little teeny spot up," and I'm like, "A little teeny spot's not going to kill you." So this is something that hurts us over time. It's not an acute illness for most people unless they move into a place that's just flooded with mold.
So if say you had some mold like in your basement, but your bedroom was on the second floor, would that be an issue?
Over time, it will be an issue, usually because the air handler goes through that space. So if you have a ventilated air conditioning system, lots of times the air handler or the furnace is in the basement, or there's a return in the basement, and then we're just circulating the air throughout the house. If you think you're in a moldy environment, one of the best ways you can tell if it's a problem, just go away for a few days to someplace you know is not moldy. Go camping, get outside. That can be, and that's a huge, huge benefit. Getting out in the sunlight, getting fresh air makes people feel so much better. And then they go on vacation, they come home and they're like, oh, and they just think it's because they were going back to work or they're, now they've got all the kids and the responsibilities, but it's really that the house, the environment is sick. And I actually just had a bathroom remediated in my house that it's a house that I'm renting, but there was a little leak into the living room and we thought it was probably a fresh leak. And when we got in there, it was not. So there was all sorts of mold. So I just went through it myself.
Yes, which I know some people who it's been like a enormous nightmare to get rid of mold.
Hmm.
Uh, I've heard that ultraviolet light, like sunlight, can actually kill mold. Is that true?
Hmm. Yes, it is. And some people will put those ultraviolet lights in their duct system to make sure it can't grow in there. Um, so yeah, but it's ubiquitous and it's all not really dangerous for most people. It's certain species that tend to be the worst, the more neurotoxic or kidney toxic or liver toxic they are, then the harder they are to get out.
So, the path forward, when you figure out that mold is your issue, can you give us some advice for that?
Sure. But I would remind you, mold's not ever going to be the only issue. So we don't
Mm.
live, we live in a complex world. We live in a complex environment. There's lots of toxins everywhere. So it's not usually just mold, although it can be. So the first steps, you got to get out of there. You got to go live somewhere else where the mold is not until the mold can be fixed. Um, you've got to sleep. You've got to eat clean. You get all the other stuff we talk about to decrease inflammation. We got to make sure we have enough nutrients, not just that we're taking in, because I have clients come to me on the prettiest diet. I'm like, can you just come cook at my house? You're like all non-GMO and organic and beautiful, but their gut's so sick, they're not incorporating it, they're not absorbing it. So we've got to get the gut working well. You've got to poop every single day. If you're not pooping every day, that's not normal. I don't know how it became that people were like, just accept, I go every 4 days. I'm like, they're like, I've always done that. I'm like, that's a problem because we're asking your body to pull these toxins into the stool so you can defecate it out. But if you're not going, they just get reabsorbed. So it's like this constant recycling of the toxins in your system. So taking care of the gut is super important. And know that it can take a long time or it can be really, really quick, like to get feeling way better once we address this.
I have some friends who are, I'm going to say, still recovering from serious mold exposure. One who lived in Hawaii, where there was just a ton of mold
Mm.
everywhere. Um, and now they seem to be very hypersensitive to any hint of mold anywhere.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
So I think that we see that a lot. And when I look at that, it means we haven't healed all the way. Even if we've gotten out of the mold, we haven't healed at the cellular level. The mitochondria are not functioning the way they're supposed to be functioning. One of the things we look at a bunch of different tests, but one of them is melanocyte stimulating hormone. It's a blood test. Melanocyte stimulating hormone comes from the pituitary gland, just like all the other stimulating hormones that talk to all the hormones in your body. Problem is, when your MSH is low, you don't, one, make testosterone well. You tend to have gut irritability without necessarily even just they can have really pretty stool studies and all of that, but their gut's always irritable. Their antidiuretic hormone is low, so they don't hold on to, they're always thirsty. They feel lightheaded when they stand up. They can have POTS type symptoms. And that actually is a secondary problem from something called MARCONs. Do you know about MARCONs is it's a resistant staph infection or overgrowth that ends up in the sinuses and it creates a biofilm. So it likes to hide itself in a little tent from your immune system and it produces its own biotoxin. And that affects the pituitary gland. And we see this really commonly. I don't think I've ever had a mold ill client that didn't also have mark-ons, but you can't treat them both at the same time. You got to get the mold out first, and then you can handle the mark-ons. So a lot of times when they're not recovering, it's because these other systems haven't gotten better yet. We can look at other tests for like vasopressin, VIP, TGF beta 1, other blood work that you can order that looks at how the proteins at the cellular level are being made. So, how the ribosomes are actually making your proteins. If your proteins aren't made properly, lots of typos in it. They don't fold right. If they don't fold right, they don't get on receptors right. So, it's this huge cascade, which is why when I started this, I said it's not just getting the mold out. Like, we have to heal the whole system. And a lot of those people I tend to find have other causes like Lyme disease, um, other inflammatory things that are going on in their system that are triggering that still. Sometimes food sensitivities, but then that comes back to the gut. You fix the gut, the food sensitivities go away. So those tend to be the canaries in the coal mine that really stay stuck. And I've had several of those people, still have them in my practice. They get better eventually. It's just, it can take a long time, and you've got to be really persistent to address each individual thing while still doing all the right stuff, the core kind of basics.
Kind of as an aside, how is MARCONs diagnosed? Is there like a swab?
Uh-huh. It's a nasal swab, just like a COVID test. You stick it up your nose and then they send it to the lab and they actually grow out whatever happens to be in there. Marcons can be one, so you can have Marcons alone with a light, medium, or heavy biofilm. So I think of the biofilm kind of being like saran wrap. So you can go to the dollar store and get the cheap saran wrap that you can't even pull off the thing. You can go to the grocery store and get the decent saran wrap, or you can go to the restaurant supply store and get the serious saran wrap. So that serious saran wrap, that we have to poke holes in it for the immune system, even to, and the antimicrobials that we use to even get in there to start decreasing the colonies of those Marcons bacteria. And then a lot of times I'll see um, bacteria that usually live in the stool. So things like E. coli and Klebsiella grow in there. And they also do a fungal culture. So there, I have had several people that are actually growing fungus in their sinuses as well. So, and if that's happening, then we're having this repeat of the mold, which is why they don't
Over
get
and
better.
over.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of horrifying to think. And that's not visually seen. You can't just when someone
Mm-mm.
puts a scope up your nose, they can't see the mold.
No, they can't. I mean, if there was a big ball of mold, yes, but like most of the time, the mold is actually in with the bacteria living under the tent. So you're just going to see that there's, thick mucus and like it's not pretty and clean and pink. But even then, I mean, and the ENTs will argue with you, but when you treat it, like the people's sinus stuff goes away, their allergies. They don't get colds as much. When they get a cold, they don't get a sinus infection or bronchitis. So all of those kind of feed on each other. So I think it's important. It's an important thing to look at, but you don't want to look at it if you've got a bunch of other stuff going on because we can't treat it yet because you'll just get worse.
Is Marcon's treated with like an antifungal? Are antifungals helpful to take?
So antifungals can be helpful to take if there actually is fungus. So you can use a topical nasal spray, an antifungal nasal spray in the nose if there is fungus in there. Marcons is, remember, a bacteria, so
Oh,
antimicrobials tend to work better. There are prescription nasal sprays, but we use a lot of herbal kind of compounds that we would use for other things like biocidin, which you may have heard of. It's an antimicrobial herbal thing, but it's an LPS formula, so it's a lipopolysaccharide formula, and we can use that as a nasal spray, and that's pretty effective most of the time.
excellent. So this has been such a fascinating conversation. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure people understand about mold toxicity?
Um, yeah, I would say there's a couple of things. One, don't give up, because people get so frustrated and then they just think it's always going to be this way. They're always going to feel this way. And it's not true, but it does take kind of the right process to resolve this and in the right order, the right strategy, I would say. And when you have somebody who is all of a sudden anxious or irritable or just doesn't sleep well all of a sudden. And I see this a lot in, the 50-ish-year-old woman who is like, oh, it's perimenopause or it's menopause. And I'm like, no, it's really not. And they look very much alike. And remember, I said about kind of filling that bucket up. It, estrogen, when we have lots of it, is very anti-inflammatory and protective. And when just because those hormones drop, and then we go and we get on hormone replacement therapy or whatever, we fix them, and we don't feel better, then all the estrogen dropping did was reveal a problem that was underneath that was kind of being hidden by the beneficial effects of estrogen that you as a woman relied on pretty much your whole life. And when that drops, so if something's going on that you're like, don't blame everything on perimenopause. I feel like that's just and hormones. I'm so done with all the ads and stuff. And it's not that hormone replacement therapy, it's not that hormones aren't beneficial. They are, but they don't work alone. And I don't even chase hormones or treat hormones or test hormones until we fix this other stuff. Because if I do, I'm going to be chasing them for the next 5 years. Because as we fix each step of this, your hormones are actually going to start getting produced properly. Your body, your
Mm.
receptors are now present in a beautiful way that they can actually catch the hormone and use it instead of them being all wonky because your cell membranes are wonky because you have all this damage. So I think those would be the two. Don't give up and know that there is a path forward. And this does show up a lot of times for women in their early 50s, late 40s, and it's just a bucket problem. You've got too many things in there, and if you're not getting better, even when you've fixed your hormones, look into this because this is one of the sneaky things that I see all the time.
So it's not only hormones that could be going on in pre and post and current menopausal
Mhm.
women, which is, as you mentioned, so finally a topic that is being discussed, but it could be mold as well underneath that's causing a lot of these problems, which is a really good piece of advice to look for because just taking hormone replacement therapy is not always the answer for everyone.
No, and I think women get so frustrated. They're like, "But I did it. I got on the bioidentical hormones and I paid all this money and I should feel great." And they don't feel better. And it's just because we've uncovered something that hasn't been addressed. So considering some sort of biotoxin type illness, and mold is the most prevalent one, at least in my experience, is worth considering.
Also, before we close up here, since we're almost at the top of the hour, but I wanted to just ask your question or ask my question about citric acid, which I know is often made from aspergillus, which is black mold. Is that a mold exposure pathway for a lot of people?
Um, so aspergillus is absolutely a mold that is one of the culprits in many types of mold toxin illness. And we use the citric acid. Sometimes we can measure that on a Dutch test or something like that. And when that is off, we go, what's going on here? Now, the two I have seen with guts that don't perform very well, that might not be as accurate. And we can do a urine mold test. It's a few $100. There's several companies that do them, and they'll actually identify which toxins are there. And I think that sometimes can be important when people are looking at their house and they go, "Oh my gosh, we found it behind the bathroom wall," and they swab it, and then they test themselves, and they're not positive for the same things. And you're like, oh, what's going on here? And then I'm like, well, this might have been an old exposure. And yes, it might have been festering enough that it made you not feel as well. But the two things aren't, I think it's important to know what we're testing for and what the biggest problems are. So, aspergillus is definitely one of them. Cheetah globus and all of the Stachybotrys species, those are nasty buggers. We don't like those in there. Anti or gliotoxin, don't like him in there. So there's a bunch that we get a lot more interested in or urgent about because they can cause damage much more quickly than other things. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
You're
This has just
welcome.
been fascinating. I'm so glad that you came on today. How can people find you and learn more?
I think probably the easiest way is the website, rootcausedoc.com. And I'm on all the social medias, Dr. Tricia Root Cause Doc on Facebook and Instagram. And our core program is called the Root Cause Revolution, and it really addresses all of these things over a 16-week period in a very supportive, high touch, very integrated environment that is pretty amazing. So there's information on that. If anybody ever wants to talk to me or one of my team about, what we do and how we do it, that's probably the easiest way to reach us.
Wonderful. And you don't need to be physically on the coast of Maryland to do this.
Nope. No, we actually work with clients all across the country through HIPAA compliant Zoom. And, I can't prescribe medications for you necessarily if you live in a different state because I'm not licensed in all 50 states. I am licensed in Maryland, Delaware, and Florida currently. But the process works the same. We can get the information we need and we can get you the support. And if I can't do it, we can find somebody who can do it for you.
Thank you so much. I know that this is information that could really change somebody's life. So I'm really glad that
Hope
you
so.
came on to share it today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Your questions were very astute, interesting, and I just think it is one of those causes of inflammation that when you're stiff and sore and nobody can figure out why, and all the tests may be negative, even like this is a thing to look at and finding the right guidance. Because you can find a lot of information out there in the interwebs, some of it not so accurate and can make yourself worse before you make yourself better.
Oh, better advice has never been said. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. And we'll see you the next time on the next episode of the Inflammation Investigator. And that's another case filed on the Inflammation Investigator. Remember, every symptom is your body's way of communicating. We just need to learn the language. If today's episode sparked something for you, I want to hear about it. Share your own investigation discoveries with me on social media at Elizabeth Yarnell, or find me at elizabethyarnell.com. Your experience could be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And here's the thing about investigations. They work best when you're not going it alone. If this podcast is helping you uncover the answers you've been searching for, please like, rate, subscribe, and review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. As a new podcast, these actions mean more than you know. Want to dive deeper into your own inflammation investigation? Head over to inflammationinvestigator.com, where you can take my free inflammation quiz to uncover which hidden triggers might be affecting your health. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Yarnell, your inflammation investigator, reminding you that the solutions to your health issues are out there. Let's find them together.